Hi, everyone. Thank you. This is Susie Brown. I am so glad to join you today. I have a very important topic that we are talking about today, and I am joined by a very special guest who is also an EFM in our great big FS community. Please welcome Scotney Young. She is here with us, and she'll give you a little bit of background and her area of expertise.
Hi, Susie. Thanks for having me again. It's great to connect. I'm Scotney Young, and I am a sexual reproductive health and gender-based violence prevention consultant. I have my own consulting business, Roots and Boundaries, that supports nonprofits, schools, international organizations, that do, any type of programming or curriculum design or training related to sexual reproductive health and preventing gender-based violence. I'm a certified sex educator through the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, ASECT. And I also have a master's in social work. And so that's kind of my background and a little bit about what I do.
And I know you work with different posts, different RSO offices, and maybe different schools in order to help educate teens to make good decisions, better choices, and to help inform their sex ed knowledge. I think this is such an important topic, and I feel like there's a vast difference in what kids, our foreign service kids overseas, are learning in school versus what kids are learning stateside. Never mind what they're learning online. Let's not even like poke that
Yeah,
beast.
yeah.
But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think something that's interesting about kind of education that's connected to puberty, healthy relationships, sex ed, um, all of those topics that's happening in the US is that it's state by state. All of those standards are usually state by state. So they're different in every state. But most states, kids usually get some kind of health education or family life education, it's sometimes called. Um, it's not always super comprehensive, but it does oftentimes cover the basic, and it covers, um, different family values, and kind of that foundational information, like anatomy, puberty, body boundaries is a big one that's coming up. How do we recognize safe and unsafe situations or safe and unsafe adults? In Virginia, for example, there's a kind of structured approach to these topics because they have a pretty thorough uh, family life education standards. So it's K through 12 standards of what students at each grade level should be learning as it relates to family life education, that the Department of Education put out. So a lot of schools, especially in Northern Virginia, where a lot of our foreign service families end up going when they're back stateside, these students are getting some kind of lessons, oftentimes starting in elementary school, to help them understand privacy, respect, how to communicate about their bodies, that type of thing. And then all the way, developing as they get older, talking about consent and abstinence and healthy relationships. When you look at international schools, it's really all over the map, like pun intended. So you kind of get a mix of information. Some do a really great job, and make a point to prioritize these topics as part of their safeguarding initiatives and efforts. But oftentimes, like the IB curriculum that a lot of international schools use, they really only touch on puberty once during the middle year program, so middle school age, and then that's kind of it. Maybe in secondary school, the teens might get like 1 or 2 sessions about consent if they have any type of like safeguarding lessons or anything like that. But there's a lot that's left out, and there's a lot that's missing, and especially with the younger kids, because teaching a 5-year-old the correct name for body parts or what private parts means, or helping like a 7-year-old understand what body boundaries are and how do we respect it when people say no, is really important. And so if that's completely left out, that's really missing a layer of protection against abuse. And so, I think a lot of folks don't know that that's something that's completely left out of a lot of our international school environments. Yeah.
I think so- some of the things that you just said, like, just really resonated with me. But one of the most important things is that it to me was that it's not just sex ed. Like, it's starting by understanding, you know, body boundaries and
Yeah.
what understanding what you know what you can say to other people, what you can't say to other people. I mean, it's just, there's so many different like layers to this, and it's not
Yeah.
just about sex.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So when people talk about sex ed, um, or sexual health education for the lower levels, sometimes people get really alarmed. But what's really important to understand is that, you know, research-based, evidence-based sexual health education starts younger, but it starts at an age-appropriate level. And that's so important, because just like any other topic, right? We're not just diving in and teaching 5-year-olds algebra. We have to teach them numbers. We have to teach them addition, subtraction. You have to layer it on over years to what's developmentally appropriate. And it's the same. And it's so important because a kid is going to have a really hard time telling you that they've been touched inappropriately if they don't know the names of their private parts, if they don't feel
Mhm.
like they can have this conversation with an adult, because it's always very taboo or something they're not supposed to talk about. And so, a funny story with my 4-year-old. So we're in Uganda, and they have sometimes what are called safari ants, right? And it's this long line of ants, and if you happen to step on it, they just attack. And so she had stepped on this train of ants, and it was biting her, and my husband was picking them all off, and he thought he got them all. And she kind of started yelling, and she was like, "It's on my vagina! It's on my vagina!" And so he pulled her pants out, and he got the ants off of her crotch area. And if she said it's down there, we wouldn't know what she meant. And so, it can be about safety on just a very basic level. So it is important to kind of start at, at start somewhere, and then add layers on as children and their relationships get more complex.
Right, and helping them to understand these terms to describe their various parts of the body and not attaching any shame to it, so that they
Yes.
can have these conversations and just be like, and this is what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you also add shame to whatever situation they're feeling really angsty about, and now they can't even use the words, and they maybe don't even know the words, and I mean,
Yeah,
that's
a hundred
just
percent, 100%. And we never want our kids, in that situation. Um, and things like puberty, curiosity, you know, our digital relationships, all of that stuff, it's not going to wait for the perfect curriculum or lesson plan. It's just happening. And so we want to make sure that our kids know that we're someone they can talk to. We want to make sure that we're advocating for this stuff in the schools that they're going to, um, and really identifying and addressing these like safeguarding gaps.
so. I mean, this is a really big question, but what do they need to know overseas? about sexting, about STDs, about consent, about pregnancy prevention. I mean, these are all such big, big, big topics. Like,
Hmm.
how can we help them? How can we inform ourselves? How can we help our kids be better informed?
Yeah, they're huge topics and they can be really awkward, right? And they can be really complex and full of emotions and especially when we're moving so often. I think for me a big thing that comes up with young people in the foreign service community is and this is true for kids everywhere, but I think there's a interesting connection to their digital lives and
Yep.
technology, because kids overseas often they're getting devices a little bit earlier. They have to maintain these large networks online to keep in touch with all of their friends as they're moving from place to place, right? They have a little bit more independence sometimes, as we are using drivers or nannies or things like that. And they interact across cultures. Like they're just in very multicultural environments. So it's so important, especially our older teens, that they know what's legal, what's risky, how images spread, how to handle pressure, what to do if something goes wrong. Um, because we know that even just talking about these just barely, just kind of bringing it up occasionally. This conversation um, lets your child know that you're a safe person to talk to about this. Um, they're not going to be punished or shamed for bringing this up, or even if they're not wanting to talk to you about it, you are bringing it up to them, and they're filing that away, that okay, I can ask my mom or my dad about this. And we know that that helps kids make safer decisions when they understand um, the landscape and what they can and can't do, or what they can avoid or should avoid. And it also gives us opportunity to reinforce our values, what we expect them to do in certain situations. um, and that's just kind of the conversational, the emotional connection piece of talking with our kids. That other piece of like actual physical health, right? We're talking about STIs or pregnancy prevention. I think something that comes up a lot for parents is they're like, well, I don't want to talk about it because then that will encourage them to do it or to, explore more. And I will just ask, like, if your parents had that birds and bees conversation with you, did you leave and you were like, oh, I really want to go hook up with my boyfriend or girlfriend now? Like, probably not. And thankfully, the research shows that, time and time again, there's been several studies that show that when parents and caregivers talk about safer sex practices, um, abstinence, all of these topics related to sex ed, it actually makes their kids make healthier choices as they get older. It doesn't, drive them to explore or make unsafe choices. So it is really important to make sure that they know what STIs are, how they spread, um, how pregnancy happens, what are kind of myths and misconceptions about these topics that peers might have. And so you can check if they are getting that information in the schools that they're going to. Sometimes they are. But if not, you are going to have to supplement that a little bit. And it's really basic health and science stuff. So I think that it's perfectly reasonable to check in with your school counselor or principal to see, how are these topics being brought up? Because as you kind of pointed out earlier, like if they're not learning it from us or they're not learning it from teachers, then they're going to learn it from their peers, the internet, chat GPT, pornography, all of these things that are definitely not going to have the most accurate um, and emotionally intelligent information.
Right. And that's really it, right? Like, of course the information's out there, but is it accurate? Is it true to your values? And there's
Yeah.
not one thing if they're not if they're having sex, they're already having sex. There's not one thing that you can say as a parent other than maybe completely forbid it, which would then of course make it that, that forbidden fruit. But like, it's not going to make them have sex. It's going to
Yeah.
help them to be informed and to make more well-informed decisions about
Yeah.
an activity that happens as a part of human life.
It is absolutely a huge part of human existence, right? It's how our species continues. A lot of it is hardwired into us. So, you can try to just stop it all. I think we just have more than enough research to show that that is not super effective, even if it's just our own anecdotal experience with our parents and
Mhm.
how strict they may have been or not strict. Um, and yeah, especially in these international communities, right? Because things like consent, um, and romantic relationships in general are going to look different in cross-cultural relationships and experiences. So, we want our kids thinking about, how do I communicate clearly what I'm okay with, what I'm not okay with? How do I ask in a non-awkward way? Or how do I deal with that awkwardness? How do I respect cultural differences? And these are things that aren't just for romantic or sexual relationships. It's also for like friendships and, sports teams and, just any type of socializing our kids are doing. So um, it's good to bring up these topics.
I think, and I should say, like I have three boys that I've talked about pretty much ad nauseum on here, and so everyone knows that like we have these conversations
Mm,
about awkward the awkward body part
yeah.
conversations and that sort of thing, and um, I think it's really important for parents to acknowledge as they're talking with their kid, um, okay, so I feel awkward here too. You're right. So like
Yeah.
just so like your
Yeah.
kids know that you're not like, yay, this is so much fun. I enjoy putting you on the spot here. And like we don't know all the things. And so sometimes
Yeah.
what you walk away from that conversation with is more questions, but to be able to say to your kid, like, I don't know that. Let's find out.
Hmm.
Let's learn, let's find a book where we can discover this together. um, and also finding the best time that works for both of you. Like if your kid has just walked home from school or whatever, and they walk in and then you're like, okay, we're gonna have a sex conversation. You're not gonna be ready for that, nor are they going to be receptive for anything you say. All they're gonna be is like, mom's talking to me about sex. Oh my
I
God.
know, I know. Yeah, yeah. You brought up something that is like always a go-to recommendation for me, which is to get a book, right? That right now there are so many books for all ages about all of these topics. I have a series on my Instagram where I talk about children's books that talk about different topics, like, for like 10 and younger, in age appropriate ways, depending on what your family values are. There's some kind of book out there. Um, we just read a book to my 4-year-old that was about secrets versus surprises. And, surprises are happy. Usually, sometimes at some point, everyone's going to know the surprise. Secrets are meant to be kept, and those are more dangerous. And so, in our house, we don't keep secrets. We want to keep happy surprises because we're going to, that's going to be something positive for someone, but not secrets. And so we had a book about that. So then we read the book, she looked at the pictures, and then we get to talk about it. And so that's a way where you don't have to, come up with exactly what you're going to say. Read a book to them and see. There's a really another good book for kids called Good Picture, Bad Picture. And it's about pornography and kind of priming our younger kids with that information of, if you see a picture of a naked person and that's not for kids. Um, that's something that can be very dangerous for your brain. So it's your job to look away and come tell me so I can make sure you're okay. And so having that book can kind of give us that talking point, that entry point. Um, Also, I like to say, like, there doesn't have to be one big sex talk, right? It's not just, when a lot of us were growing up, I remember my daddy like got a napkin from the table and a pen and was like drawing body parts and stuff. And then it was like, okay, you get it? I'm like, oh gosh. So yeah, it doesn't have to be one big conversation on the birds and bees and everything in between, it can be a lot of little conversations. I say it's like those hop on, hop off tour buses, right? You hop off, have a conversation, get back on, and go on with life, right? And you can use things like television if you're watching TV together, or watching a movie together, and it's like, oh, it seemed like he kind of kissed her without knowing if she was interested or not. Like, what do you think about that? Um, of course, pause it so you don't get yelled at. But but yeah, it's they're finding those little entry points, so can be a little bit less intimidating for parents or caregivers. Um, yeah.
We have done that quite often because there are a lot of things that are depicted in movies and films that are um, not quite reality. And
Mm,
thankfully, we all have our magic remote where we can pause it and just be like,
yeah.
so guys, let's talk about this. And it's not to say, Hollywood always lies. That's not what I'm saying at all, but it's just valuable fodder for a really important conversation and to help them understand, it's not also not just about sex. I do that for food things
Yeah.
because that's my shtick. I do that for violence things.
Hmm.
Um, in video games, we talk about how, and I can't even remember the game that they're currently into, but like, they die and then, sometimes they like the red seeps in from the side. This is what you have to look forward to, Scotney.
Oh
I'm so
boy.
sorry.
Oh
But
boy.
the like red seeps in from the side because they're like getting close to dying, but they're not quite dead. And then they drink some
Right.
magic potion and then they're fine. Or they die and 2 seconds later they're alive again. It's like,
Right.
so that's not actually the way it works in
That's
real
not
life. So
how it
let's talk
works.
about this. So
Yeah, that's
it's
great.
great points to just pause and have those really short soundbite sorts of conversations that
Yeah.
are relevant.
Yeah. And I will say from experience of working with, large groups of teens, like they will be so uncomfortable. They will roll their eyes. They will, do all this stuff. And then I get my feedback surveys and they're like, this was so interesting. I learned so much. Da, da, da. So, they are listening, even if it seems like they're not. And sometimes you're just planting seeds that will grow a little later. And that's okay. But it's so important to bring that stuff up.
Do you think conversations in groups are more valuable or individual?
I think both. I think they can both have a role. I was um, a part of I attended a webinar recently, and they were talking about with sex ed, like, should you separate by genders? Um, and the panel was kind of talking about the some of the benefits of that, or maybe when it might be appropriate. And it's the same thing with like individuals or groups. I think a group allows folks to really see that they're not alone, because so many times in these classes I do a lot of anonymous question boxes and stuff, and I feel like the basically every question can be boiled down to like, am I normal? Am I weird?
Mm-hmm.
Is this weird because this is happening, or I'm thinking this, or I'm curious about this, or I don't want to do this and everyone else wants to? Um, and so, group settings can be really helpful for reinforcing that idea that you are normal, that everyone is different, everyone is worried about these things or has these questions, and and also to make sure everyone's getting the same information, which is really important as part of a community, whether it's a school or a sports team or whatever the group is, that we're all on the same page that this is not acceptable or this is acceptable, in terms of how we're going to treat each other or what our ideas about interacting, and then on an individual level, especially with an adult, you're really showing this young person that you are a trusted adult that they can come to, and that you're willing to have these conversations about topics that are uncomfortable, that are sensitive. It's not going to scare you away. And so they're building that kind of roster or that network of trusted adults that they can turn to. And so those individual conversations really do a lot to to solidify that network for them.
It really does take a village.
Yeah, it totally does. Because maybe, they don't want to ask their mom about, what a condom is, or wet dreams, or whatever the thing is, especially puberty topics. But they know they can ask, their aunt or their uncle, or a family friend, whatever the case may be. So making sure that they have someone they can turn to that's going to give them, correct information is super important.
I do feel though, and this is a soapbox that I'm trying really hard not to hop up on, but I do feel like there are often parents that expect the school to take full responsibility for these kinds of topics, maybe because they don't feel informed or because they feel uncomfortable. But I would beg every parent to please, please, please don't do that, because it's our responsibility as parents as well to have these conversations at home, as well as whatever the school can offer.
Yeah, especially if I think, like, something that's really important is that, for the most part, a lot of this information at school is presented in a fairly values neutral kind of way. It's like, this is what happens. This is how you get pregnant. This is how you prevent STIs. This is, what it means to have a consensual relationship with someone. Whether or not you should do that, or what that means for you and your personal beliefs or your religious beliefs, that's not there typically. So if you're not having that conversation with your kids, even if these topics are being covered in school, it's not being covered with the values that you want to share with them, however that looks like. And so I think that's just really important to keep in mind, is that it is worth it to bring this up, even if you're just like, hey, I saw in your your school syllabus that you guys are talking about this week. This is kind of what our family thinks about this, or whatever the case may be. Or having these little conversations around television or video games or whatever. That's where you get to transfer your values and not just the information, which I think for a lot of parents, they really want to do that. You can't force your kid to adopt all your values as they grow up, but you can certainly share them with them, and what that means for your family, and what you hope, the decisions that you hope they make.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Another thing that you referenced recently was talking about, like, for lack of a better description, boy topics versus girl topics, and how addressing these sorts of things individually or separate. Like, most importantly, we are addressing all of these topics, but also, I feel like a lot of the conversations I've had with my boys have been about what may have been previously regarded as girl topics. And I feel like it's helped set up my boys in a way, and help them, inform them in a way that helps them to be advocates on behalf of girls, their friends, other girls, women in, that they don't even know. So for example, in our last post, a lot of the local pornography industry was focused on images of Western women rather than of local women. And so a lot of the male population felt that they could grab girls who appeared to be of Western descent, and they had every right to do that. And so unfortunately, it set the sort of atmosphere where oftentimes girls did not feel safe, for example, using the local transportation options, or even walking on the street, or riding their bikes. And so my boys took it upon themselves to be like, well, I'll take them home, like from wherever we're say we're at a party or a gathering or whatever. I'll go out of my way and take them home in order to make sure that they get home safe, that they feel like they can come to begin with, and then they can then get home safe. But then also just to start help building community around supporting the girls all
Yeah.
feeling safe. And I
Yeah.
feel like if we don't have those conversations together and we don't have these like supposed girl topic conversations with our boys, then they don't
Yeah.
know what the girls are going through.
Yeah.
And they can't be advocates on behalf of those of for those girls, for other women around the world.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and not just advocates, right? But having empathy.
Yeah.
So much of as I mentioned previously, I work a lot in gender-based violence prevention, and so much of violence happens because of the lack of empathy, and these very rigid power dynamics. And so if we're not making a point to help our young people see the different experiences that everyone is having and the different um, vulnerabilities that everyone faces, um, then we're really missing out on helping them build those connections with other people in a positive way. And especially with boys and girls, as you mentioned. I like to say, like, with young people, with young boys, when I'm teaching in, like, middle school age, is this always comes up. We're teaching about anatomy, and they're like, why do I need to see the girl anatomy, like, and just total meltdown. And it's like, well, for one thing, like, what if you become a father one day? What if you become a husband one day? And don't you care about the women and girls in your life? And wouldn't you want to help them be healthy and have what they need to be safe, and feel, yeah, have be healthy in every part of their body in every way. Um, and that sometimes that helps to contextualize it a little bit for them of like, I'm not talking about when you have sex, I'm not going to talk about that, but just, a lot of you have mentioned that, one day you're going to be a dad or you're going to get married or something. Like, we have people that we care about um, in our lives that have different body parts, that have different experiences, that are going through puberty differently than us, and so being able to understand that can really go a long way in building empathy and support and creating a more supportive culture that's built on respect, and not on violence or bullying. um, uh, yeah.
Well, that's really so important. Um, I have another question, and we've kind of talked a little bit about this as we have flowed through this conversation, but we move a lot, right? And so,
Mm.
how do we keep our kids safe in the communities that we don't even know, like any of the nuances or anything about these communities? How do we do that? It's a tough role for us as foreign service families.
It's super tough. It's super tough. And there's a lot of pros to being a foreign service family and getting to experience all these different places all the time. But there are some cons or some challenges, right? And that's certainly one of them. I think living overseas means that our kids are constantly in new environments and constantly with new adults and new norms, right? New cultural norms, social norms. So I think the most like powerful thing that we can give them is the ability to trust their instincts and recognize tricky behavior, we like to say. Like, it doesn't really make sense to teach stranger danger like we learned as kids, right? It just doesn't work for our lifestyle, and for a lot of us it doesn't fit in our values. Like, I don't want you to be afraid of every stranger that you meet. That's just not how we want to interact with the world. Our lives are full of strangers. And so meeting new people constantly, um, and engaging with different people, peers, neighbors, community members, domestic staff, um, all of that can be a good thing. But we do want to teach our kids to spot tricky adults, is kind of some of the new language that we're using, to try to emphasize or explain a person that is trying to take advantage of them in some way. And so we want them to recognize if a grown up is asking them to keep secrets from their parents, or if a grown-up is giving them gifts or attention that feels uncomfortable or weird, or if they're making inappropriate jokes or crossing physical boundaries or trying to isolate them, trying to keep them from other peers or get them alone, or asking to take pictures of them or have private conversations. These are things that tangible things that we can help our kids recognize um, and say, this is when you need to get help. And these can come from peers too, right? Not just adults. So going over this with our kids and creating those safety plans, that's something that can travel with us as we go from place to place. Checking in with schools and caregivers to make sure that they have a plan. Or, if we're hiring domestic staff, making that a part of their onboarding is like, these are some safety rules that we teach our kids. So can you help reinforce that? You're hopefully creating another trusted adult, but at a minimum, you're letting them know that this is something that I'm aware of and that I'm looking out for. And so, that's where, again, I say, talk to the other adults around you, whether that's you're putting your kids in there's a lot of like Girl Scouts or um, those kind of programs where they're doing camping trips and whatever. Like, bring that up. Be the parent who brings that up and is like, what is the safeguarding that we're bringing to make sure, there's not just one adult with alone with kids. We want to make sure that, we're creating a safe environment for everyone and a comfortable environment for everyone. And so bringing up those points with the other adults in your circle, you're creating that community of trust and of kind of a culture of safeguarding and protection around these topics that you can create anywhere that you go. So yeah.
My goodness, that is super helpful, and really like actual like actionable suggestions that you're giving, and I really, really appreciate that. I think hopefully all of the folks that are listening also appreciate that. So we've talked a little bit about sex ed and this this umbrella of education, stateside versus overseas. We've talked about how to help inform our young people and what that kind of looks like throughout their ages. We've talked about parents giving them suggestions on how to have these conversations with their kids, and also how we keep our kids safe overseas. Scotney, do you have any other with respect to your time and with our listeners' times, do you have any like last points that you'd like to make before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say that acknowledge that having these conversations are not easy. There are a ton of resources out there, a ton of great books and podcasts and video series about how to talk to kids about XYZ, whatever the thing is. So, Google it so you feel more prepared, but also have grace with yourself and remember it's okay to make mistakes. If you say something to your kid one day, that doesn't mean you can't go back the next day and say, hey, you asked me this question and I don't think I had the best answer. So I was researching last night and this is what I found because I wanted to make sure that I gave you the right information. Um, that is such a great way to maintain that open communication with your child, but also to model what it looks like to be accountable, right?
Yeah.
And to say, like, I make mistakes sometimes too. I don't know what I'm talking about all the time. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. You can go back and correct it. So hopefully that also takes some of the pressure off. As I mentioned, use books. There's a lot of great books out there. And maybe they're at that age where you just give them the puberty book and close the door and be like, let me know if you have any questions. That's totally okay too. Um, but then check back in like, hey, did you read that book? Did you have any questions? Was there anything interesting? I read it. This is what I saw. um, and just so you know, like, it can be a really awkward time and you're not alone. and they might be like, Mom, it's okay. That's fine. That's fine. At least you put it out there that, you know, you're open to talk about this. And then yeah, just talk to your schools, talk to the adults in your circle, so everyone's on the same page.
Thank you so much for that. This is super valuable. I hope that you don't mind. We're going to list your Insta page,
Oh
your
yeah,
social
yeah,
media,
yeah,
so people can check in with your suggestions for books. You said you had a list.
yeah,
But also we'll include a couple other links in the show notes that people can just check on and see what
yeah.
sorts of information is out there.
Yeah, I
There's
have a
so
ton of
much out there.
resources. Yeah, I have a ton of resources. I have a lot of great colleagues in the sex ed field that really specialize in working with parents and caregivers to help them have these conversations because like you said, we can't rely on the schools, especially when we're moving all the time for us in particular. So yeah, there's some really great resources that I'll share with you and you can share with your audience.
Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much everyone for listening. I know this is a little bit longer, but it's such an important topic and it's such these conversations with your young people, it's so valuable for them to just grow with. And it's not that when I was growing up, just to like showcase my age, it was like a film after
Mhm.
school in 5th grade, and you had to have like special permission, and of course boys and
Yeah,
girls separate
yeah,
rooms. That's not what it's like anymore, and
yeah.
unfortunately our kids have access to a lot of information and a lot of misinformation, and
A
so
lot of
we
misinformation.
really want to make sure that they understand what they're hearing, and they know what's important to us. And so like we're their big people, so we need to make sure that we are responsible big people.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
so much for joining, Scotney. I really appreciate it, and I love this conversation.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks all.
Bye.